Speaking of agriculture, the art and sometimes not so subtle science of speaking to an agricultural audience. That's this topic of this fantastic episode with my guest, Vance Crowe.
Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of the Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well, but what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't, but you can now figure that out with pattern.ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field, then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy.
Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. I've got a good one for you today. Vance Crowe, if you do not know him, he's exceedingly active on social media, particularly on Twitter, now known as X. He has been in front of thousands of audiences on behalf of Monsanto previously, now working for himself for the last decade. He has a show called the Vance Crowe Podcast. He's also got the Ag Tribes Report. A month ago, I was the guest on that. You can go and look it up. He also does a thing called Legacy Interviews. And we're talking about why we should just do a show, The Business of Agriculture. And while it's not about digging into some financial point about the business side of agriculture, or about, new trends going on in production agriculture, this one's a fun one that I thought I should reward you with here in the merry month of December. Because Vance said, what I should do is talk about speaking to agricultural audiences. And I'm like, oh, wow, give him a little behind the scenes, what it's like. So he's been in front of a lot of audiences. I've been in front of a lot of audiences. We got a lot to share here. And since you are an agricultural person, my guess is you go to a lot of meetings, because the one thing about our industry, there's still a lot of meetings. Consolidating industry, yes, but a business that likes to do business face-to-face. And you probably see some of this, and you probably see somebody like me or Vance. If you're listening to the show, there's a good chance you've been in one of my audiences, and you're like, yeah, I wonder what it's like. So we're going to tell you what it's like. That's what we're doing here with my buddy Vance on this episode of the Business of Agriculture. So you brought up the topic. So your first three thoughts when you brought up the topic were?
Just bombing. I wanted to hear what you thought of how you come up with your material, and how do you decide, what should I do in the moment? Because the funniest thing about speaking is people think you have everything planned out, but once you're up there, anything can happen. So I was thinking we would chat about those three things.
Any person, there's a couple of things here. Your degree, aren't you like collegiately trained in communication? Wasn't that your thing?
I mean, I don't know. What do you learn in communications college? I don't know. Not much of anything.
Well, yeah, but you probably, I took one speech class, Com 114 at Purdue, that I don't think you can leave Purdue without taking Com 114, which is speech class. That's the only speech class I had ever taken. I think I got a B. Well, I know I got a B. I know I did not get an A. A blonde chick from Texas was the teacher's assistant that taught the class. They don't even have real professors. They have like a 23-year-old grad student that basically is the instructor. And I think I got a B. I know I got a B. I maybe got a B minus. And I remember they talked about you had to go to the library and you had to do all this, and then, writing your speech. And I got to tell you what's interesting is from that point on, meaning my sophomore year at Purdue, I have never written a speech. I have prepared notes. I have researched like crazy, read. I have written jokes. I have never written a speech. I've only ever used a keyword outline. And I don't even use that anymore. So that's one thing that I suppose when you talked about the planning portion of it, I'm planned. I'm well read. I'm pretty well researched. I've thought through it, but what an amateur, and I'm not being in any way mean, I'm just going to say that, you and I get paid to go out and get on stage and talk, Vance. the person that does it once every 4 years, they have to get in front of the Sugar Beet Council and present something. They will write it out and get up and read it verbatim. And I've never done that, and I don't think that a professional should have to do that. And so I don't know where you are on that, but to say that you get up there and you're just winging it, clearly not. But to get up there and read verbatim, it looks to the audience like you're so unconfident or so unknowledgeable that if you didn't have it written verbatim, you wouldn't know. And I once critiqued a woman that a group that wanted to be doing more speaking, and they invited me in. And I'll think that the one poor woman, she got up and read 5 pages. She read 5 pages.
It's awful.
And the thing is, her topic was that she had written a book, Vance. Her book was about how to battle diabetes with diet versus drugs. And she had written this book. And she had to get up, and so she gave a 6-minute talk reading it verbatim by page. And I said, "Did you write this book?" She says, "Yeah." I said, "Are you diabetic?" "Yeah." "Have you successfully battled diabetes with diet instead of cancer?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Then why in the hell do you have to read verbatim 6 pages of speech? You've written this book and you have lived this life. Surely to God, you don't need to read this verbatim. You should just be able to say, I believe that we can conquer, we can help people who are diabetic without drugs using diet because I have lived it and I have done it here." I insulted her, but I thought, so I don't know about you, but my first thing is if you've got to write it and read it verbatim, I get it. Some people just don't have the confidence. Maybe they shouldn't be on stage, but the problem is it erodes all credibility to the viewer or listener.
Yeah, I kind of developed my own presenting style. When I was at Monsanto, the first time I ever went out to speak on their behalf, they gave me the PowerPoint slide, and that went horribly, right? I'm like trying to read whatever they think is important. They're like, this has all been message tested. And it was terrible. It felt inauthentic, and you're trying to go off of somebody else's thing. So from that moment on, I never did it again. But the problem is when you present on behalf of a corporation, if you write anything on that slide, their legal department is going to see it. Yeah. And so I would hate sending my stuff to the legal department. So I invented my own style, which is I will have slides that kind of mark what am I going to next, but they only have like one word on them or a photograph on them. So they don't have anything else. And what it did was it forced me into this very different way of creating slides so that now when I see somebody with a whole bunch of words on their slide, like I'm like, whoa, this is never going to go well. But I use that as a way to keep time moving and kind of keep me on track.
So one thing that's happened in the old days, from COM 114 till now, speaking was speaking. And then somewhere about 20 or so years ago, it became reading a PowerPoint. And the great thing about coming up in comedy, like I did, first off, I was really before PowerPoints. I quit my job in 1994, so 30 years ago. And also, nobody expects you when you're a comedian to get up there and read a PowerPoint. There's a lot of people who think they're giving a presentation and they say, yes, I'm going to deliver a presentation. And you and I see them. And the first big mistake they always make, as you said, is essentially they've got 300 words on a slide on a projector screen up in the front of the room. And you're like, well, first off, the people, that's a lot to read, as you just said. And secondly, the real bad presenters turn their back to the audience and then read the screen. And I'm always thinking, well, do you think this crowd's illiterate? Do you think they're just that stupid? Because if you're just going to read the screen, just send them the damn thing and then just let them read it, unless you think they're illiterate, which is an insult to your audience.
Yeah, as soon as they're reading, they're not paying attention to you. And so that's why 1 or 2 words is all you want, because you want maybe to drill an idea into them, or you want to like pop them into a different way of thinking. But any extra words outside of that, they're going to shut off listening and they're just going to read.
And they do it as a crutch, right? Because it's just like the author of that book reading her entire speech and shaking while she was doing so. It's because it's a crutch. I never used a slide until the year 2012, when I switched from being the political comedy guy to then the ag comedy guy to then the commentary outlook economics guy, evolution of career. And I didn't like doing it a lot then, but I sat in on a session that said, and you've probably done this as well, 20% of humans are auditory processors. 40% of humans are feeling processors. And you've got to almost make them cry or give them a hug because they're everything with them is their feelings. And the other 40% are visual. Something that you do. Now, in the old days of political comedy, I could appeal to all of those because the visual aspect of it, I was dressed up as Bill Clinton. So there's a visual component that, there's that. Whereas when you're dressed up as just Damian Mason, farm guy, ag guy, don't have it. So I started using slides. And I also knew from what you just said, any slide that I put up was going to have no more than 5 words. Like China goes away as America's ag customer, whatever that is, 6 words, something like that. And a picture of Xi Jinping shaking the Brazilian president's hands with a soybean pile behind it. I don't want them looking at that slide more than just say, oh shit, China goes away as an ag customer. That's that Chinese guy, and that's a pile of soybeans. Oh, and it looks like there's an emblem of Brazil. All that image needed was about a 4-second view, and they look back to me to explain it. And I think that's the powerful thing. It just creates an image, maybe a feeling, and then I'm the words.
Yeah, I think for me, I do a lot of graphs where I'm explaining something that requires like to step, but those are very, very simple. And really the audience will come up later and they'll believe they constructed the whole thing in their mind, right? So they're not really complicated. There's not many words, but that's what I'm using the visuals for, is to either do exactly what you're saying, pop a meme in there, or so that way I know that people are kind of walking with me as I explain this kind of philosophical idea.
It's an interesting thing about, speaking of agriculture, we're going to get to that. By the way, I've got to do my first commercial here. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I want you to realize that guys like Vance and I have to make a living, and we do that with our sponsors. So please look up these companies. Pattern.ag, of course, my opening and closing sponsor, but also my middle sponsors, Redox and Truterra. Truterra is focused on supporting farmers at every stage of their sustainability journey to help plan, make, and maintain regenerative management practices that will improve your agronomic, your economic, and most importantly, your environmental sustainability of your operation. You can find the right program. Sustainability programs are absolutely going to be a thing. When we're depressed farm economics, I want you to think about how you can diversify your revenue. Sustainability programs might help you do that. Go to truterraag.com to learn more. Truterra is part of Land O'Lakes, the cooperative that's been around for more than 100 years. You know you can trust them. Check out Truterra. Okay. About the speaking to ag and speaking of ag, you said bombing. All right. Anybody that ever tells you that's been in front of more than 10 audiences that they didn't suck at least one of them is lying.
Or just completely obtuse, right? There are a lot of people that have bombed that never knew they were bombing.
Well, yeah, I'm killing it up here. Yeah, no, you're getting polite laughter, and they started clapping thinking it would make you leave the stage. Doesn't mean you're killing it up there. It means you're killing your crowd, and they want you to get the hell off stage yet.
So the bombing that I did, it was like maybe a year and a half ago, and I was at a pork meeting, which, like, I don't know if you can tell the difference between the different commodity groups, but pork groups to me is the hardest group to get laughing. Like they aren't as interactive. The soybean and corn guys, they're way more active. The cotton guys have usually had a couple of pops before you start presenting. Yeah. But pork is something different. So I was at this pork thing, and I told this joke, and it kind of takes a little while to set the whole thing up. It's basically like, where in the Old Testament are Jews prohibited from eating pork? And it goes through this like long description where it explains why you can't eat rabbits. And it's because they chew cud, but they don't have a hoof. And the same thing is true of pigs, right? But the joke in between there is I show that you're not allowed to eat camels because, yes, they chew cud, but they don't have this divided hoof. And I say, and here is the proverbial camel toe, and I show this photo, and it just, boom, did not go over. No laughter, no joking. And from then on, I was like, oh no. Like, once you've had one joke bomb, then every single one that goes after it, it's hard to get warm.
Oh yeah. And so here's the thing. You're not even in the business of comedy for the first half of my career, and actually still today, I still am asked. I just got off the phone with the Michigan Apple Association. I'm going to speak there in 2 weeks. And they said, we know you know about ag and we see your podcast, whatever, but it's been a tough time for the Apple people. For your presentation, can you really keep it light? And I said, you mean like 25% funny? She said, can you keep it more light? They still want you to be funny. So I get called upon to be funny. I don't need one joke about the Bible and the camel toe and all that. I'm supposed to have like 30. And so the bad one is when your first one flops. But being funny is something very different than we're just talking about speaking of agriculture. And you pointed out an interesting thing. Before you got into the joke part of it, you talked about audiences. And we've worked for a bunch of them, right? You were on behalf of Monsanto for many of them. So the onus wasn't on you back then to be good or don't get paid, be good or I will not get the next gig. You were going around on Monsanto. I've always had the pressure to, if this bombs, there's 3 potential gigs I won't get out of this, right? That's how I looked at it coming up. So there's a little bit of a difference. But the other part of it is I didn't have Monsanto brass breathing down my neck saying at the 14-minute mark, you used the word poop, and we don't think you should represent. So I'm sure that what the pressure you felt was from corporate, the pressure I felt was be good or you don't get the next gig.
Monsanto left me alone for the most part. I was just doing so much different things than what most people had done. The hard part for me was you didn't know if when you got done with your presentation and you go to the Q&A that there's somebody in there that hates you and they really want to see you get destroyed. And so they're going to try and hit you with a difficult question or call you names. And so for the first 5 years of my speaking, so now I've been out of Monsanto longer than I was there, but the first 5 years of my speaking career was definitely having the pressure of, I have no idea if somebody's going to come at me hard. And they did sometimes, but I actually grew to love that. In fact, I miss it to some extent that I don't work for Monsanto anymore.
Well, yeah, 3 people were in that audience. Now, I'm probably not from an ag crowd, but you got sent out. You got dispatched to go and talk to non-agriculture people. So there was a minimum of 3 people in every audience that decided that they hated Monsanto, that Monsanto was the reason that their grandma died. Monsanto needed to be not only put out of business, but all of their employees needed to prosecute. I mean, there was, you talk about the level of depraved, obsessive lunacy on the anti-Monsanto movement. But
it wasn't always the outside ag. I just got back from the Montana Farm Bureau and a woman came up to me and she was like, you were here 8 years ago and I remember you were working for Monsanto and I asked you this and I did this, because there are people within the Farm Bureau system. They've got no love for Monsanto or no love for glyphosate. So it was always being on your guard, which was, something that took some getting used to.
The thing that I think that most people that haven't been professionally in front of audiences, and I'm not saying just like once, like I said, and if you've been, and again, this is an industry that has a lot of volunteer or a lot of trade organizations, so probably a lot of people listening to this, yeah, I've had to get up on stage and do this for the Farm Bureau, sugar beet growers, pork council, regional water, whatever. To do it once every decade, to do it once every year, that's hard because you've got to prepare that. But to do it when you've got to do it weekly, and you've got to run from this one to the next one, and the old thing is you got to do it when you're hungover and your flight got canceled. And then the next one was going to give you 18 minutes to literally run through the Minneapolis airport to get to the next gig in Bismarck where there's a blizzard going on. And it's actually not in Bismarck. It's 48 minutes. It's 48 miles from Bismarck and you're driving. You got the pressure I always thought was to be, a lot of people think, oh man, get paid to stand on stage and talk. When those that really get it realize that know us, oh no, it's, he did the thing in such and such town and was a hit. And he knew 2 of those people because he's, has done work with them a number of times. So, goes to the bar and has beers. You get to bed at midnight. You get up at 6:30 to catch your flight and you realize, oh, they canceled my flight. Now I'm running. Now I'm scrambling. Now I'm stressing. So now you're I said, you're hungover, you're tired, you're stressed, and you're catching planes, and you don't quite get there, and then you get there, you got to drive through a blizzard, and literally when you get there, I've had one in Garden City, Kansas, where a guy grabbed me from that little airport, which is the size of your driveway, and drove as fast as he could to get me in snow conditions to get my hotel. I ran up. They had a key for me, ran down to my room, just dumped my bags, put on a jacket, like wetted my hair a little bit, ran down and walked in that room, and they said, "Are you good to go?" And they handed me a mic, and I walked up on stage and did an hour. And that's the tough part, that to say preparedness, you got to be going your feet, and you got to be prepared, and you also got to be, I think, pretty resilient. And that's the thing that a lot of folks probably maybe wouldn't appreciate about, is it hard work like baling hay or digging ditches? No, but it's hard work.
Yeah, and I think to your point about like you have to get into the vibe of the audience, right? Like if you show up and you only have a few minutes, I don't know about you, I try and be there hours and hours ahead of time to try and see like, can I feel what this group is feeling? Because you could take the same speech, you're giving it in one town, and then 24 hours later, you're giving it in another town. The audience feels completely different. They're approaching it differently, whatever is going on with them. And you've got to figure out a way to ride that electricity in a way that, is going to be meaningful to them. And to your point earlier, like mine is not comedy at all, but I have to have people laugh because that's how you open up people's minds. The great Barry Flinchbaugh used to always say, if people are laughing, their minds are open. And if you can't get a laugh out of people, they're just not with you. Laughter is that social signal that says like, yeah, we're all in the same team. And so you've got to get it.
It's endearing. There's a warmth that goes along with it. They might disagree. I mean, I have that all the time. I disagree with you completely about this, and this. But you're a funny guy, and and you made a couple good points over here. That's the person as a tractor. There's the person that just hates you. I have more of a personality that creates that than you do. We tell our clients like, hey, you realize somebody in your crowd's not going to like me. It's just the way it's going to be, because I'm going to put out commentary backed up with intelligence and research that might disagree with them to what they've always believed. That we're never going to run out of food, for instance. That's some of my latest stuff, that we're going to be an oversupply of food probably from here on. All that stuff about feeding the world and we're all going to starve is bullshit. It's not going to happen. There's somebody sitting in there that's 65 years old and has lived their entire life thinking if they don't grow more bushels of corn, by golly, we're all going to starve, because the nun told them that, just like they told me that in catechism, that there are starving children in Africa, and there are. But it's not because you're not growing enough corn in Iowa. So certain things that I point out that are data-backed commentary and outlook, you get some arms crossing, but then you also make them laugh. And that's to your point, Vance. Their arms are crossing because they don't like what you're saying, but then they also are laughing. But there's still going to be one person, their arms never come uncrossed. They decide they just hate you. That happens.
I one time was given a talk in Pennsylvania at, I think they call it like the largest buffet in the United States. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a really popular place. And I used to have this like little spiel about how long agriculture has been around and for hundreds of thousands of years. And I have this whole like explanation. And as I'm describing this, I look out and I see, oh gosh, about 20% of this is the plain community. And they're sitting there being like, we did not come from evolution. This is not, we've not been around for the, and like, I could tell, man, like they are not happy with this. And afterwards, a guy that could crush walnuts with his grip, comes over and he says, that stuff you mentioned about evolution, those are all lies. And like, all right, well, where are we going with this? And back then I was working for Monsanto. So I definitely felt like I couldn't just go hard in the paint. I had to listen to him. He's a customer, and there's an interesting way.
Yeah, well, yeah, you got into something that tested their fundamental beliefs, etc. But it's interesting. That's a religious thing, and I point out that while that person was a fundamentally religious person that believes in the Bible and all those kind of things, I mean, based on what you just conveyed to me, but there are new religions, Vance, and veganism is a new religion. A major agricultural corporation hired me 13 years ago, and I was hired to do 8 of their meetings. Absolutely blew it out of the doors. The reason I got 8 meetings is I did their national meeting and blew that room up like to the point where people are spitting up with humor and then they like my points. So they booked me for 7 more regional meetings. And that large corporation had a vegan somewhere in the human resource department. And remember, religion, the religion you're talking about was a Bible. That person's a fundamentalist believer. The religion I'm talking about is veganism is a religion. Climate crisis is a religion. COVID became a religion. Being opposed to whatever it should be, gasoline cars becomes a religion for many of these people. So this vegan in the HR department of a major corporation got me fired when that person found out that I was booked to do all these because didn't like the fact that in my 50-minute set, I had a 3-minute riff about vegetarians and vegans. And so, yeah, you had a guy that could crush walnuts with his bare hands come up and tell you that evolution's a lie, and that's because of his fundamental beliefs. I got banned from doing contractual work for a major corporation because of my jokes about 3 minutes of vegetarian jokes with it sandwiched in a 50-minute set on stage.
Yeah, man. I mean, I've definitely, I remember there was an insurance company that wanted to hire me and they really wanted me to get in some like pro DEI stuff. They were like, that we represent this farmer group and we really need them to hear these messages. And I was like, that's not me. This is not, this is not going to happen. And while you're talking to them, if you're not willing to say, I'm going to stand up and say these things, you're not getting hired. But like at the end of the day, there's no way I could, I'm not going to stand up and say their thing. That's an interesting thing about like finding that right balance between what the organizers want you to say and what you have to say. And in my contract, I always make it clear, and it's always worked out well for everybody. But like, what I'm saying is mine and I'm responsible for it, but it's also like you don't get to slide anything in and ask me to say anything on your behalf. I talk about what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I turned down work for a major agricultural entity. It might be called the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I mean, if we would just go use hypotheticals, who wanted to give me money, and I did some video stuff for them, and then they told me that they didn't. Someone in their Washington D.C. bureaucracy, which they have a lot of, didn't like the fact that I put in there some Bill Gates commentary, which was well researched. Bill Gates does have huge investments in the synthetic meat industry. He's got huge investments that he almost is using then the power of his billionaire status to go and create hysteria against beef to sell more synthetic beef. I'm like, well, why would you have a problem with that? Those are factual data points and it's real. Well, we're in the business of making friends. And then they said, now when you're with us in Nashville, you're going to have to read script. I said, I don't read script. I don't even write my own script. I've got an outline. I do research. I play the crowd and I make it funny and I make them laugh. Well, that wasn't going to fly with them. And then they said, well, what if then we help you? You come up with, and you can change some of the things as long as we approve it. And I said, well, I've got fans in that audience also. And when I get up and read your script and it doesn't sound like Damian Mason, they're going to say, I listened to your podcast. I see you on video. I watch all of your stuff on social media. I've seen you on stage twice before. What the hell happened? I'm going to say, oh, well, I had to read a script. And then they're going to say, well, we're not a fan anymore because we like the fact that you are real and you don't read a script. So I walked on the deal. So I've turned down work, just like you said, where they want, and the bad part it was an agricultural entity that wanted me to read their script. And that's a problem. That's a problem because it's not what your audience wants. Your audience didn't come to your meeting just to hear your indoctrination or the whatever the hell it is that your people want their talking points to be.
Yeah, I mean, and the people that are willing to do that aren't in this game very long, right? Like there's only a few of us that have been around for, I'm on 10 years, you're way more than that. But like if you're the kind of person that you'll stand up and say what anybody will pay you to say, there's nothing really valuable for you to stand up and talk about. The audience doesn't have any value out of what you're saying. That's like the most important quality of being a speaker is that you are willing to say things that maybe people don't like, especially initially, or maybe they are uncomfortable with. But if you don't say things that people don't like, or they're always comfortable with, then there's no point in you being there. You could have just gone up there and petted them for a little while.
Exactly. As my wife says, when we disagree on topics, she says, it's okay to have differing points of view, or, if we thought the same all the time, one of us wouldn't have to be here. And I find it problematic that some of these planners, again, referencing that one that I already did, who might have been the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, who said, yeah, we're in the business of getting along. I'm like, you're doing a disservice to the 2,000 people that come to your conference. Yeah, fine. Find some other person who'll get up and read your script of whatever prepared note, never taking a stance on anything. Never taking, it reminds you then, okay, I might as well just go on and watch a Mitt Romney speech where he just never says anything, never believes anything, your typical politician type. And I don't believe that does anything to the audience. We tell the audience, you do too, I'm sure, a few things that, like you said, they may disagree with it, but it makes them think. And that's where nobody ever, there'll be one person that hates you because they're off on a loon, whether it's veganism or whatever that thing is. But the ones that come up and say, yeah, I disagree with your point over here, but you've done your research and you made me think about something I never thought about before. I like that. And I think that's what the meeting planner is hiring.
Yeah, that's the way, the funny thing about who it is that you're serving in there, the meeting planner, the way they are going to tell whether you succeeded or not is after you're done, the person that walks past them on their way to the bathroom and either says like, yeah, that was a good job, or no, that was bad, right? That's like, because they're in the business of making sure their members are feeling good about it. And so you've got to find a way to walk the line so that you're going to make people uncomfortable enough, but that they still want to give that thumbs up.
Speaking of getting paid to talk, no, I don't get on stage and read somebody else's script, as we've already admitted. And certainly I've probably made an enemy when I already told you about the one that I turned down 2-3 years ago, because I refused to get up there and just read your talking points, because that's not what I do here at the Business of Agriculture. This is in its 8th year as a show, and I've been 30 years on the road. So you know what? We do need to thank the companies that made that possible. So I want you to think about Redox. I already mentioned them once. Redox wants you to know that if you are a Midwest producer, the evolution agronomic strategy from Redox Bio-Nutrients is a way of thinking that you can help you get more with less through ultra-efficient plant nutrition and superior biostimulants. Redox is a family-owned and operated business out of Burley, Idaho. Darren Moon started his company 30 years ago in specialty crop. Thought there was a better way using biological and bionutrients to create a better crop. And then he went to turf, and now he's increasingly in broad acres. You really ought to check it out. Their Pathway program combines flagship products Mainstay SI and Banks with breakthrough nitrogen optimization through their new RDXN technology. You can learn more, and you can also find an agronomic contact at redoxgrows.com/Midwest. Redox, REDOX, grows.com/Midwest. So what else you got? When you think about you talked about audiences being different. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire. What's a good audience? I'm not talking like, these people. In general, what's a good audience?
Oh, I like cattle guys, like the Alberta Cattle and Men's Association, Arizona Cattle.
Yep.
Like cattle people are a little bit rough. You don't know exactly who you're going to get. You often get some horsewomen in a cattle group, and those are different sorts of ladies. So I like the people that are decentralized. They don't live right next to each other. They're the most fun.
I make jokes about horse women. I have for 15 years. You were in my audience, I think, when I made horse women jokes. I say a good audience is an engaged audience. I want them to not be imposed. Remember a couple times, like a cooperative has me do their employee thing, and some of the employees don't want to be there. Now, you can cut through a lot of that with being funny, because it's like, oh crap, I thought there's going to be someone coming in and doing more training or something. You can cut through that, but you're using the first 6 to 10 minutes of your own warm-up act, and then it eats into it. My best audiences are bright. Dumb is a bad audience, no matter what. Going back to my political comedy days, people that aren't bright, that don't read, that don't pay attention, they're really hard. They're really, really hard audiences to be in front of. And I like engaged. I like that they actually want to be there. Regionally, oh, the South can be a little more skeptical of a guy from the Midwest. But other than that, I think we do fine. And then from industry to industry, I'd say we're generally okay within ag. So all you got was you like cattle.
Well, I think what I really like are the thing about cattle people is that they're willing to push back, right? They're willing to raise their hand and be like, I don't agree with that, or what about this?
Yeah.
And for me, like coming from Monsanto, that was when I thrived. It was when somebody didn't like, that's fun. That's where there's dynamism and you can see what you can really do.
You mentioned Alberta. I enjoy Canadians. I enjoy Canadian audiences. I have some Canadian following on this show. I can't say I've never I've never had a bad time with a Canadian crowd that I can think of, and I've enjoyed working in Canada with Canadian crowds. And I also, probably the same as you, I do a funny thing where I name, about halfway through, I take a break. I say, by the way, I'm not like these dumb Americans that think that you're skiing up here in July or that you plant your corn with a snowmobile. And they all laugh, say, I can even name the 11 provinces. And I do that. There's a thing when you show Canadian audiences that you know that they are a different country and you give that respect, it's powerful.
Oh, I mean, that's everybody. I remember that when I figured out like one of the biggest benefits of sitting and having a meal with people before you speak is that then you can stand up in South Dakota and talk about shooting prairie dogs and you're going to nail that joke and they're all going to know like, okay, this guy gets us in a way that prairie dog joke's never going to work in Illinois. It just won't land.
Right. I just used that example, by the way, the other day when they were talking to me about ad libs, and Lori said Damian was always amazing back in his political comedy days. You do enough of these. I used to dress up as Bill Clinton and stand in front of a crowd, and I had no idea what I was walking into because it was a surprise. So there was no eating dinner and talking about prairie dogs. I came in sight unseen to a room that I had not seen before, to an audience I had never talked to, and I got on stage, and boom, it's time to go. And as I select sires in Ohio, I think they're near Columbus, Ohio, they sell, obviously, genetics for the livestock trade. So it's 300 people at a semen sales meeting. Yes, that's real. And about 20 minutes into my show, it's powerful in comedy and in all speaking to take a little pause to where your crowd just kind of looks at you for a second. Not Mitch McConnell senility pause, more like just give it a pause and just let the crowd sit there. And then I just paused for a second, and off the cuff, I said, so you people sell semen. I never even thought about charging for the stuff. In Bill Clinton's history of being a womanizer and a philanderer and all that, and it's in the 90s, late 90s when that was all in the Paula Jones, Monica Lewinsky, this crowd came absolutely unbuttoned. So that's the fun of being comedic is when, you've got your set. You've got your stuff that you wrote on the plane and the stuff you just rehearsed and the stuff that worked yesterday in Dallas for the crop insurance people. But you got to pull about 2 minutes of stuff off the cuff every 40-minute set. And then, of course, you pull it off the cuff and you're like, damn, that nailed it. I'm going to put that in the act. Well, you can't put the semen salesman joke in any other crowd because it was the semen sales meeting and that's the only one you got.
Yeah, I mean, that's the joy of being right there in the moment. You're only going to get that one time. You got to take that jump. But you said something that I think is actually a great mark of somebody that moves from being an amateur to a pro, and that is, are you comfortable with pauses? Because great speakers, they understand the power, not just of like, what are my words and how fast am I going, but am I willing to stop and allow a moment to like rest right there? And it takes real guts to do it. And that's one way you can listen to somebody and if this person never takes a break, even if they're a good speaker, it's because they're too afraid to stop and let the momentum change. That was like one of those things that you learn along the way.
Well, just as you said, and we're not in any way being judging or harsh. It's what you and I have done it so much. I remember in front of thousands of audiences, not to mention the recordings and the videos and all that. When you're in front of thousands, literally your career, thousands of live audiences, you have a different perspective. You study the nuances, etc. When you watch someone that's uncomfortable, they believe they have to fill every bit of air time with sound. And that's when nervous presenters go to things like well or or And so I encouraged so many people that said, I've got to deliver some presentations. And I said, all right, tell me for 5 minutes what you want to cover. And then they said, well, I haven't written it yet. And I said, so spend 3 minutes telling me what you want to cover. This is your area of expertise, right? And that's the real thing I'm trying to always help them do, is just convince themselves that they are the expert and to be confident in that. And then say, now, why did you say 4 times? Because I already believe that you know what you're talking about. You needn't fill every spare space of air with sound. Ums and uhs make the audience think you don't know what you're talking about. And I know that you do. And so that's been my little confidence thing I always do with people to prop them up.
Yeah, my advice when people are asking me about getting started in speaking is like, what do you have to say about this subject that people in the room don't already think? Because unless you have that, like, there's no point in you standing up. Like, you actually have to push yourself to have something that you think that's different than they do. Otherwise, all you're doing is getting up there and agreeing. We talked about this earlier, but I think for a lot of people, being like actually stopping and thinking like, what is something I believe that they don't already agree with me on, forces you to go to the next level that then makes you more interesting because you actually have something important to do there.
So best and worst thing about being a speaker in agriculture. If you want to think on it for a second, I can go first, or you can tell me the best and the worst. Me? The best is that we have good people. We have good people. We have people that they might fold their arms. And like I said, it's across the industry, but there's usually not raging lunacy where they'll disagree with you, but they're not throwing stuff at you, etc. Because in the political comedy days, my first 10 years of my career, I did every industry you can imagine, undertakers and morticians to the damn, insurance, finance, banking, car sales. I mean, you name it. Car sales crowds where all these dudes with their fancy watches that all, were just total, like straight out of the book of, they were disrespectful. They'd be too drunk and just real peckerheads. Ag doesn't have that. So I say best thing is we have an authenticity and a politeness among our people that is really, a lot of industries do not have that. Worst part, I'll give 2. One, our crowds sometimes are not unengaged. They are the stand in the back, not involved type of a crowd. Whereas most of the other industries outside of ag back in the old days, they would sit up front and they would get right into it. And the other worst one is we have a lot of meetings in places that you almost can't get to. Camrose, Alberta is not an easy place to pick up. Denison, you just start naming these towns, Dickinson, North Dakota, and the kind of places that you and I go to cover meetings. So it's a tie for worst on those 2 things, with the locations maybe being one of the worst. When it's just Omaha, when it's St. Louis, Kansas City, Dallas, Des Moines, where you can actually get there pretty easily, you're like, oh, yippee, Indianapolis, thank God. But then when it's for every one of those, it's the, Gehring, Nebraska's, and the places that are a real challenge to get to.
Yeah, gosh, that's actually a really good one. The worst part for me, I think, is I don't know how to frame this, because the audiences can want whatever they want, just like in comedy, right? Like whatever makes the crowd laugh is funny, and that's the only decider of it. But I think a lot of times in ag, they want the same thing back to them. I've heard them say like, "Oh man, we really love this one economist," and you're like, "Yeah, but I've heard him. He says the exact same thing year in and year out." But they like it, and that's what they want. So that's kind of the one that always kind of grates me. The best thing is, I think, really in line with what you were saying, is the values of ag and me are aligned. And so when I'm talking about things that I really care about and the future that I want, and trying to blow oxygen onto this field, the culture of agriculture is the one that I want my daughters to grow up in. I want to be a larger part of the world. And so by supporting that, you're really supporting, the future that I want to see.
Yeah. Right. And it's where we are. I mean, obviously I Right? It's where we are, and it works for us. Okay, my other rapid fire, not so rapid fire questions for you. So we talked about when you bombed. We talked about which I said, if anybody tries to say, sometimes you don't bomb because you suck, and that's the other one that you've got to be cautious because we are service providers. So if you tell the person that booked you, hey, I bombed, and you know what? That room was working against me. You had 60 feet between me and the crowd. That's just a bunch of dead space. There's no way to connect. Those are just things that I would tell them, like, keep the crowd close to me so we can have that visceral and emotional connection. You go through all those things. But they give you a bad room. They give you a bad crowd. The other one, overstat. When the meeting or the hotel room is got chairs for 300 people and you got a crowd of 80. It's like talking to an empty gymnasium and you can't get any emotion, you can't get any energy going. So sometimes you don't bomb, but you get a B instead of an A. And if 4 things were out of your control that, had they been changed, you could have gotten to an A. Those are the ones that I come home feeling bad about. There's an old thing, Vance, that I learned a long time ago, since I have a couple more years than you on this. An old presenter, and it could be comedy, this could be economist, it doesn't matter. There's 3 presentations to every presentation. You know this, right? There's the one you intend it to give, there's the one you give, and then there's the one when you're flying home you wish you to give. and that's there's an accuracy to that, isn't there?
Oh, I can completely relate to that, right? The one that's in your head that you've already got the guitar solo on, and then when you're going back home and you're like, I didn't quite get there. I'm with you also on the room. The other day, actually, not that long ago, I gave a presentation and they were like, all right, we're going to get started. And I was like, don't you want to call the rest of the people in here? Because there's like tables for 400 people and there was probably only 70 people and they were all in the back. And if you don't have that closeness, there's a certain electricity that you're just not going to get. And it's tough.
And the problem is the crowd feels it and the meeting person that hired you maybe doesn't understand it. And so I'll say twice, no, really, let's have the hotel come in and take half these tables out of here. Oh, well, I'm not comfortable doing that. Plus, we want to make sure everybody has enough room. Like, well, have you been on stage 2,000 times? Because I can tell you this is going to be more than just a heavy lift. It's going to be an impossibility. So a lot of times they take the input and sometimes they don't. And it's a tough one. What about my last couple of thoughts here on the actual thing of getting up there and doing it? You strike a nerve, it almost makes you emotional. And there's people that probably think, oh, well, Vance probably has that. He's a Damian, though, you're kind of a hard ass. I've had it before where I got emotional. And that could be a tough one.
I mean, I'm actually surprised to hear you say that. I'd like to hear you say more because this does happen to me. Because I think that if you're actually saying something that matters to the audience, you're right on the edge of like keeping it professional, but having it be something that's deeply important to you. And I have definitely cracked on the stage before.
A little bit about the legacy, a little bit about the legacy in the background. My father, lost his arm as a little boy and we're just tenant farmers. We didn't come from nothing. So the farm that I was raised on, he actually got with a little bit of settlement when he was turned 25 and was able to buy some crappy ground that nobody wanted. That's a little bit emotional, but there's a little bit of emotion that goes along with some of these other things. When we talk about things that the audience is tough to hear, I was in front of a dairy crowd, me being a dairy crowd, and a feed company paid for me to be there. And I said, you want me to be honest or just make them feel good? He's like, well, can you do both? I said, here's what it looks like to me. 15% of the dairy industry producers are going to be out of business in the next year and a half. Well, that's a hard truth and it came true, by the way. That's a hard one because I know those people, right? I was one of those people. And so, yeah, that's could be a challenge.
Yeah, and it's not a spreadsheet. You're not like, oh, it's just these numbers. That's actual people that are going to be moving off the farm and changing their lives. For me, one time, literally moments before I went on stage, my wife calls me up and says, oh, the ultrasound came through. The baby's healthy. This is after more than 10 years of trying. And said, we're going to have a little baby girl. And I was like, thanks. I got to go because they are literally saying my name right here. So I've just had this like pivotal life moment, and I'm up there like trying to process it in front of the Wisconsin Corn and Soybean Association. And like ultimately I just brought it up with the crowd and ran with it, but like trying to hold it together as you're like experiencing something in your own life, when the reality is this audience needs something that's not about that. They need something about what's going on in their world. So I've had those moments, but then also talking about the things you really care about in life. I talk about legacy interviews when I'm on stage sometimes, and the things you hear and what you learn about people making their life decisions. And, that can choke me up too.
Yeah, because you're hearing someone else's story, and there's some, most of us have had some ups and some downs and whatnot. Because, see, things are a little different now. I've got my Extreme Ag job where I record videos and podcasts for them, and I show up at events for them. And I've got my speaking, and I've got this show, and I've got some other things. For years, other than investments or buying farms, the only thing I had was getting on stage. And so that thing about the show must go on was never lost on me. I came up doing $300 comedy gigs starting out, when I quit corporate 30 years ago, 1994. It was, $200, $300 gig somewhere. You work in somebody's basement, and the next day you're this, that, whatever. So you're doing everything you can. So I never took the idea of a booked presentation lightly, or something like, oh, well, you can just call in sick. I'm like, no, there's no sick days. There's none of that. So 1999, phone rings early in the morning, because I was living in Arizona, and my brother-in-law would tell me that my dad died. And so it's, okay. So they're like, we'll have details later. I said, okay. So you go through all that. And I was to be at an event literally the next evening. So couldn't do it. So I had to cancel, and I had to find somebody, because I still felt an obligation to that client. They've got 300, salespeople meeting in wherever the hell, Tucson or something. So I found a replacement, and I apologized profusely because it wasn't me, and they had wanted me to do my comedy show on stage. And then I flew back to Indiana and buried my dad, delivered a eulogy, and then ran down to the church dinner, like you talk about agricultural, the way we are, our culture. Went to the church dinner that the old church women prepare, and shook hands with everybody and ate some ham and scalloped potatoes, and then ran to the Fort Wayne airport to fly to California to be on a stage the next day. That's something that a lot of people, so I gave a presentation literally the day after I eulogized and buried my dad, and the same thing when my mom. I was in Kansas City for an event literally the next day after speaking and delivering or whatever, burying my mother. A lot of people, like you talk about your finding out you got a baby. That's harder work than people realize, but it's your job, right? And so I just thought, this is what I do. This is what I do, and I got to set the emotions aside and get on this stage, and I got to set the emotion for this audience, because that's why I'm hired. They're both hard gigs.
Yeah, I think there's also something, I'm being curious to see if you relate to this. Like, there's an aliveness to being on stage that is second to none. There's like, if you are saying, I don't know, if you're getting up and being a sycophant, you're just saying what somebody else wants you to say, probably not. But for me, like, I'm up there with something that I believe, something that I want to transmit to this audience. And when you get into that space where you are having the electricity, where you're putting it out into the crowd and you can feel it coming back, and this is transmitting, for me, that is, the higher self, the point in your life where what you are doing matters, because the people in that room are going to take your ideas or the way that you frame something, and they're going to go do something with it. To me, that's like the absolute best in the whole world.
You don't want to get to where, like you said, first off, being a sycophant, and you're just, then you mean nothing, stand for nothing, just like you're going to read somebody else's script. The other one is self-adoring. You don't want to be that. And also, in any way, insulting to the crowd is always a tough one. Or, so there's a lot of things you can't be, that you shouldn't be, right? Self-absorbed. God knows we've all heard that story about, if you buy my book, from Dr. Phil or all, that kind of stuff on down. In the pure comedy days, I looked at it, Vance, as I was there to make their meeting not suck. In fact, we promoted that for a while. That was one of my promotional lines was, I'll make your meeting not suck for your people, which I meant I'm going to make it fun. And so, yeah, again, I day after I buried my father, I flew all night to get to California. Next morning, I got up and I had to go, and I don't even remember what crowd it was. It wasn't an ag crowd back then. And I had to stand up there and deliver a 45-minute set and make that crowd enjoy their meeting. And I guess you've got to have that thing of, this is important to me to do this because it's what I do. The points that I make now, like you said, there's more to it now where it's like, hey, I'm going to tell you some things you're not going to hear a lot of ag meetings, because it's a little bit off the cuff. I mean, it's a little bit off the hook, I should say, from what you're going to hear. It's not the same old stuff. And so there's a redemption, like you said, when they come up and say, I don't hear some of your ideas always. And that's a little, that's really that's provocative.
I mean, what's better than that? The audience, that's one of the ways I can always tell, like, did you succeed is, do people have questions at the end of it? And do people want to talk to you afterwards? There's nothing worse than getting off the stage and not having people want to talk with you, right? Where they're just kind of like avoiding eye contact or they've got something better to do. But that feeling of coming off the stage and having people come up because they want to, most of the time, even if they have a question, really what they want to do is connect with you. They want to just keep that going further because you've made that electrical connection.
A long time ago, in one of the interviews I read with Jay Leno, he talked about the lunatics that, because when you're famous, and we're not Jay Leno, we both get that, okay, listener? We understand. But there is something where I've had people come up afterwards that are a little bit not right and get mad. I've had people back in the political comedy days in particular, I had guys that want to fight me because they thought it was terrible that I was making a mockery of American politics or whatever. I mean, so it's not that way anymore. But Leno in his interview said, yeah, when these people that are off unhinged come up, if you pay attention to them for just a second, that's what they want. And so, we don't have that as much, but he's right. And it's not just about the people that are in the lunatic fringe. If you pay attention to everybody, when they come up, like you said, they want to know, they listened to you and they'd like to share something back. And that's fine. That's our job. So when they say, yeah, that one thing you talked about, well, here's why I disagree. Fantastic. I mean, I'll take that because that's important to.
But it's hard because if you're just coming off the stage and you've done a good job, there is adrenaline flowing through you and you're like, all right, I have to take whatever this energy is that I have going on and now I'm going to slow down enough to actually pay attention to this person and recognize that even if they have a question mark at the end of their statement, really they wanting you to reflect back to them. They want more of a chance to speak. And that's something I bet that took me several years, 3 or 4 years to really learn that. And then all of a sudden you have this oh, you idiot, you continued to make it about you. It's not about you. It's about them.
Yeah. And that's why we're there. And that's the good thing. All right. So, on the way out the door here, I know this is a long episode, but it's a good one because Vance and I get paid to talk, obviously, and now here we are talking, and we're talking about the business of talking. Speaking of agriculture, if you want any other thing, see, since I'm the interviewer, but you're an interviewer also, what's your things that you want to ask me? Because I can throw one back at you.
Well, I think what is the stuff that you wish you got to talk more about? What do you wish that was an opportunity for you to be able to share more?
Sometimes I wish that I had a non-agricultural following that would pay me to tell them some realities about the industry. In other words, that there was more interest from non-agricultural entities. I get it at mixed events. I get it when I'm living in Arizona half the year because I'm in suburbia. And I get invited to my neighbor's party or something, and I'm drinking a beer, and then they say, hey, so they told me you're a farmer. I said, easy. I own a farm. I was raised farming. I actually rent mine out. People that are real farmers might quibble as to whether I'm a real farmer, but yes, what can I do for you? Well, and then it's always what their yoga partner told them, that there's hormones in the milk, or is it true that we're, killing ourselves with this? Sometimes now, it's like, what do you think about RFK? Or I just got asked yesterday, what's the deal on tariffs? I've been hearing about these tariffs. So I like that at least they're asking someone that I believe is me, pretty damn agriculturally knowledgeable, and I keep up with a lot of pockets and corners of ag, just like you do, because of what we do. We're in front of cranberry people, to cattle, to cotton, to canola, to all that. I wish that I would get hired to speak to non-agriculture people and say, 5 truths about agriculture and 5 challenges moving forward, because I could put on that program for any non-ag crowd and say, here's some realities that we're going to face and why it matters to you. That would be, because the disconnection that we talk about, that would be that'd be a fun direction for me to go down the road.
That's a great answer. And and it is a fun thing to be able to do. Not enough opportunities. That's a good answer.
So what's yours? Answering that same question.
Oh, you're going to laugh at me. I mean, I think that...
By the way, the viewer says, wait a minute, what was the question? The question was, what do you wish you could get on stage and talk about, or what do you wish you could do in terms of your speaking and on agriculture, but you're not currently?
I mean, you're going to laugh at this, but I think that I wish I was talking to more ag about Bitcoin. I think it is of deep, deep importance to the future of agriculture, and the amount that it has the potential to change the future of ag is simply undescribable. And I really wish that there was a hunger for that. There's not. I'd clearly go out and talk about it if somebody was out there saying we want to bring this in there.
Yeah.
But it's changing. I mean, I was just talking to a board for a farm credit group, and they wanted to hear all about it. So that'll eventually change. But
so in 6 to 12 months, you come back on the Business of Agriculture show and we talk about Bitcoin, because and you wondered if we should cover it. I need to learn more about it. I mean, it's been this thing now for 7 years, 8 years, and I just it's not that I refuse. It's just not on my radar enough. I don't disagree that it's going to be. I just don't know enough about it. So we'll do that another time. All right. If you want to find Vance Crowe, because you're listening to this, how do they find you? Vance Crowe Podcast, Ag Tribes Report, or Legacy Interviews. Legacy Interviews is a cool thing. He sits down. You say, you know what? We've heard all the grandpa stories. No, you probably haven't. You know what? You can hire Vance for a certain amount of money, and he'll do in a studio setting an interview with grandma and grandpa, and you'll hear about stuff that'll probably make you cry, because they'll open up to him like they don't open up, because it's not the same story they're going to tell at Thanksgiving dinner. It's a very different thing. It's a cool thing. Go and check it out. So if they want to find you, how do they find you?
You're the best. They can find me on X at Vance Crowe, or any of the speaking stuff, vancecrowe.com. And
Crowe has an E on the end of it, by the way. It's Vance, as in Vance. Crow, and Crow as in the bird, but has an E on the end of it. All right. You know where you can find me? You can find me at DamianMason.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook on a professional page. I've got a YouTube following. Please subscribe to my YouTube following. I just started actually getting behind this in the last couple of months. I need to do more there. Please go and hit subscribe, and also share this episode with someone that you might think would enjoy it. 375 or so episodes in the last 8 years. It comes out every Monday. I appreciate you being here listening. And Vance, I appreciate you being on here as a guest.
Thanks for having me, Damian. This is a lot of fun.
It was a long one, but a good one. Until next time, thanks for being here. I'm Damian Mason. This is the Business of Agriculture. Well, that concludes another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. This episode was brought to you by Pattern.ag. You know, everybody in agriculture understands the importance of soil health. We also keep an eye on our soil better than we ever did through advanced soil testing. But what if there was a company that provided predictive analytics, not just checking out nutrients and all the elements that are in there, but also could tell you the degree of risk you face with disease and pest pressure? That's right, Pattern.ag can do that. They actually can tell you, hey, you're going to have a real issue here. You can preemptively, proactively treat for corn rootworm or cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome before the problem actually starts costing you yield. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to find the nearest rep that can help you start doing better for your soil.